Eric White is our first speaker this morning, and he's going to talk about social impact investing.
So the origins of impact investing arise from investing with values and a focus on economic justice. Impact investing was coined in 2007, and that's intentionally seeks to create both financial return and positive or social and environmental impact that is actively measured. So think of impact investing as much more the direct, active, more along the lines of the peer-to-peer. There's a spectrum. And so for philanthropic entities, and individuals for that matter, with donations, you could sub for the grants side. This slide is designed more for philanthropic entities. But it's this whole progression. So grants is 100% financial loss, but 100% impact. And philanthropy, or donations, the same story. Venture philanthropy is an emerging field, which is the idea of thinking like a venture capitalist, but applying it to philanthropy. It has three pillars. So tailored financing, so not traditional venture capital style financing, but much more flexible to work with the entity in position. Non-financial organizational help, which is that sort of venture aspect of it, is to work alongside the enterprise. And then active measurement. Impact investing, which is the focus of this, is right there in the middle, and then we have responsible investing, and then you kind of roll over in traditional investing, which is sometimes also referred to as extractive investing. What's happening now is that is what's informing impact investing, is that created a conversation among individuals that said, I can put my money where my mission is, as opposed to just simply try to generate financial return, which is what has supported impact investing to become what it is today. And I gave this definition. This is the World Economic Forum's definition, and I think it's a useful one because it talks about both financial and positive social and environmental impact that's actively measured, which speaks to some of the aspects of opportunity zones. Certainly the intent of the legislation, but it's much less clear on that last part. This is all in private market investments, so direct investments, and the investors are now branching out. It started out with foundations, and then it's grown to include financial institutions, family offices, and pensions and insurers. It's global. Certainly microfinance in the 2000s was the poster child for impact investing, but it's grown to include clean energy, microfinance, housing, especially in developed markets like the US, is a very important part of it. Here in the region, we have our Twin Cities Impact Investing Ecosystem Project. It was an effort to say, there's all this activity going on, let's bring everyone together around sort of three principles. If we know what each other's doing, then we can collaborate and share best practices. And then by knowing what each other's doing, we can determine what's holding investment activity back, and then we can catalyze activity as a third part to fill in those gaps. The first stage of this was to generate this map, which sort of indicates where capital's flowing. This was specifically about impact investing, so leaving aside grant-making activity. In parallel with this initiative, we, as part of Susan's role, my business partner as the executive in residence for impact investing at the Minnesota Council on Foundations, led a collaboration that resulted in the Minnesota Impact Investing Initiative Fund, which is about $24 million vehicle that invests on behalf of 12 foundations in securities whose proceeds finance affordable housing, social infrastructure, and small business lending. They're buying listed securities from agency mortgage-backed securities like from Ginnie Mae and those kinds of things. It's focused on underserved communities in Minnesota. And this was a number of different styles have been tried with limited or no success, and we were able to get this model off the ground here in Minnesota, and now this approach is taking shape in a number of other states. So we're glad to be first, but some folks are moving faster than us to get it built. This is where it kind of ties into opportunity zones. There's a number of initiatives that the foundations and investment community has been very focused on, how to take the ecosystem to the next level, and expanding the reach to greater Minnesota is a big one, which directly applies to opportunity zones. Advancing idea generation, it's very much the same kind of thing. How do we involve, and that kind of ties into the fourth, the communication is to focus on how do we involve lots of different kinds of players that didn't participate in kind of the first round of the ecosystem. And then the third one, the build, is really around this diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, which is directly applied to opportunity zones as well. So opportunity zones in context. Historical tax programs focused on offsetting income tax, and so the interest is often fluctuated with the economic cycle, where opportunity zones are really focused on capital gains. So this is a different kind of capital. On the spectrums, it falls right directly in impact investing. It's certainly going to, the underlying investments have to be financially viable to justify, because the tax benefit is not material enough to overcome really poor performing investments. But they need to be impactful as well to satisfy certain impact investors' demand, but not all opportunity zone investors are going to be impact focused. The other point we would like to make on opportunity zones, there's going to be a lot more content on them in specifics, but is that it's not an exclusive program. There's lots of ways to use blended capital is the sort of or integrated capital is kind of the buzzword. It's the idea of different kinds of tax credit programs, different kinds of investment, and there's provisions in the new guidance that came out Friday, and making it clear that these sort of blended capital approaches are acceptable, and that philanthropic activities, because if you think about nonprofit investors, the tax benefit has little use to them. They can play a lot of roles in supporting the infrastructure that helps these investments to get done. One of the points in the growth of impact investing, it started with philanthropy, but families and individuals have been the largest growth engine of impact investing over the last 5 years. And so this particular legislation, which is focused on capital gains and individual capital gains as well as corporate capital gains, aligns very well with a trend that's happening.
So let's go back to Congress, December of 2017. That is where the Investing in Opportunities Act was born. For our state, what it means simply is that there are 128 census tracts that were selected by communities and then submitted to Governor Dayton, who with his team then submitted them to the Department of Treasury. And they were all approved. So there are 128 of them. 44 are in Hennepin County and Ramsey County combined, and then the rest are throughout the state. And as Eric was just telling you, the intention is that you would take what is a tax advantage investment for the investor, and you would couple that with the needs of the community, and then you would have what would be a collective benefit. We've got the 3 metro areas, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Duluth. And then there are others, for instance, Bloomington, Crystal, Robbinsdale, West St. Paul. There are other areas within the Twin Cities, and some of you I know are here in the room with us today. So in terms of the intended social impacts, one is job creation or business enhancement, let's say, attainable housing, and revitalization of our communities. Those are individual buckets, if you will, and they are all very heavy lifts. But in the areas that are targeted because of this legislation, we believe, and we think you do as well, that the potential is great. In terms of job creation, the investment in businesses, there is an opportunity for that based on the legislation. What we're going to focus on is the part of the law that has to do with real estate. So there are 2 components when it comes to real estate. You have an opportunity for either new construction or substantial rehabilitation. In a nutshell, I will tell you that substantial rehab means you have to put in probably at least as much as you paid for the property. All in all, what we are thinking of and what we want to focus on with you today is really impact real estate. And so what does impact real estate mean? Our definition is that it means these 4 principles. It's how it's used, and again, the law dictates some of this, how it's designed and built in terms of energy efficiency. We want to make sure that the projects that are being considered and that are moving forward in Minnesota, to the extent that we are able to impact those, that they are in fact energy efficient, even LEED certified. Who and how the project benefits. So first and foremost, the tenants, and those could be existing retailers, those could be residential, the owners, et cetera. And the goal of the legislation, while some will find this hard to believe, the goal is not to remove people from their location. So the goal is not dislocation. The goal is certainly not gentrification. And so our hope is by working together as a community and identifying projects that make sense for the community, we will have an opportunity to work then with funds that abide by the wishes of that community group. When I've been trying to explain to people why somebody like I, who has no real estate background, would be attracted to a company like Minoza and to work with communities, this is why. This is not a tax credit. They're not going to get a credit by putting money into these funds. They're going to get a return on their investment. For the people who are able to give and do generously, this is how they make money. They're already investing. They're buying securities. They're selling securities. This is just capturing that capital gains so that the community benefits on that pathway. So it really is a win-win. I'm going to have Lauren Scherber, my colleague, come up now and talk more specifically about what that looks like for the investors and how some of the key issues that are emerging around the Investing in Opportunities Act will impact all of us.
The big thing and what really got people excited is that there's a lot of appreciated assets out there. So stocks that have gone up in value, properties that have gone up in value. I look at the next 10 years and there is a lot of capital, and they're also smart, and they've got financial advisors who tell them how to save money on their taxes. So there's a good chance that a lot of assets are going to get sold and moved into Opportunity Zone funds. Basically, Opportunity Zone funds will take these gains that people have, allow them to roll them over, and I'll go over into more detail on that, and delay those capital gains payments. And so basically an investment that's made in 2018 would be deferred until 2026. After 10 years, you get an even bigger tax break, or the money that's invested in the fund is tax-free. So there's a pretty good incentive for accredited investors to move money into these funds. But the basic way that this works is somebody sells a stock or a bond or a business and has a capital gain. They decide then, I've got 180 days to roll this capital gain over into a qualified Opportunity Zone fund. So it's about patient capital. It's about making long-term investments into these communities. So as they hold that investment, after 5 years, they get a 10% reduction in their capital gains tax, and after 7 years, they get a 15% reduction in their capital gains tax on their original gain. Then there's a tax event. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. We'll go into more details on that. But after 10 years, the gains on the fund are forgiven. So they're working out the exact details on that, but the latest guidance that came out shows a longer horizon to this tax incentive. Originally, it sounded like you got to get your money in by 2019 or you miss the boat. It now sounds like you can invest your money up until 2028 and then have up to 20 years of tax breaks after that through 2048, but still a minimum of 10 years of hold time. So this is a program that it's sounding more and more like it will be around for a long time. It's sounding more and more like it'll be like a 1031 exchange, but with some definite advantages. There's a lot of tax breaks for people to invest in these types of funds. Here's an example of a typical investment. Under the scenario of an Opportunity Zone investment, the incentives are going to be pretty strong for people to move money into these types of funds, possibly more money than can be invested wisely. Long and the short here is that the tax advantages are only realized through qualified Opportunity Zone fund investments. You can't say, well, I bought this building in this neighborhood, therefore I get this tax break. It's only through these funds. So to get the full tax benefit, it sounds like you must make your investment in 2019 to get the 15% step up in basis 8 years out. After that time, it sounds like you just won't get that added 15% step up in basis. But it does sound like for the projects themselves, there'll be about 30 months to complete the projects, which is more typical in a timeline for a substantial rehab or new construction. So very specific eligibility for the projects. Basically, on the real estate side of things, there's new construction from the ground up buildings, and then substantial rehabilitation. It's now loosened a little bit where they've said that you can exclude the land value. So if you buy a $500,000 property, the land is worth $150,000, the building's worth $350,000, you would then have to put $350,000 into the improvement within 30 months. So it's a substantial rehab, and I think that in some ways that's a good thing in that it will be harder to gentrify turnover apartment buildings. Like, only certain projects make sense under this scenario. Most of these neighborhoods have a high concentration of poverty as it is, and a lot of affordable housing. And so this is market rate development. It's going to bring in workforce housing to other types of housing or commercial rehabilitations and new businesses. And so I believe that having a mix of income levels and attracting people of all income levels to these neighborhoods are going to be key to helping turn around the neighborhoods. And so bringing together this whole group to concentrate on certain areas and concentrate investments is going to be key.